Hey friends, I'm taking a little break from the emails because I come across something interesting that I wanted to talk about. And I just want to be clear so that there's no clickbait from the title. I'm not about to explain what Munchausen by proxy is. And did y'all notice my pronunciation there? With my accent, a lot of times it's instinctive to say Munchausen by proxy. And I'll probably do that at some point in this video. It's just my accent. But I'm not here to explain what it is. I don't have the education, the experience, or the medical knowledge, but I have saw some things in some articles that make me question what some of us thought we knew Munchausen by proxy was. And so I just want to put this information out there and ask y'all what y'all think because I feel a bit alarmed from what I've been reading. And some of these articles are over 20 years old, hopefully, but also we know from the quite famous case recently of a mother accused of Munchausen by proxy who unalived herself that false accusations are still happening and they are devastating to parents. So, as a lot of you saw from my community post, I have the book Sickened, that is a memoir of a girl who suffered from abuse from a mother who was diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy. And whenever I opened it, the very first thing I see is a foreword by Dr. Marc Feldman. I think most of us are relatively familiar with him from the Gypsy Rose Blanchard case. And he is the one who diagnosed Dee Dee with Munchausen by proxy after death, based on the information available post her death. So I was interested to find other cases of Munchausen by proxy. And specifically, I started wondering about cases where the perpetrator wasn't a mother or a female specifically. And I got into a little rabbit hole here because I come across another Dr. Feldman. I was really confused at first. Like, this was a Dr. Kenneth Feldman, not Dr. Marc Feldman that we're all familiar with. And let me share with y'all the article I came across. Okay, so this article is from the Seattle PI. The date is August 6, 2002. Title is Persecuted Parents or Protected Children. The pounding on the door late that August night set Chris Brooker's heart hammering. He and his wife were just getting ready for bed. His stepdaughter and grandson, who lived with him, had gone to Disneyland. Now 4 police cars were blockading the street in front of the house, their flashing lights creating an eerie strobe against the Renton neighborhood's modest split levels. Brooker opened the door and stared into the face of a beefy detective, one hand on his holster, the other thrusting out a warrant. He was flanked by 3 more officers. They came to take Brooker's 4-year-old grandson into protective custody and to gather evidence against the person accused of poisoning him, the boy's mother. With that, the Brookers plunged down a rabbit hole. Okay, this website keeps doing a pop up. Lord alive, pop ups. Plunged down a rabbit hole of accusations into the bizarre world of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. It would take nearly 3 years and $100,000 in legal fees to find their way out and clear their daughter's name. They blame their odyssey on a Seattle pediatrician named Kenneth Feldman. So do at least 5 other families who claim they too were victimized by a misdiagnosis that ripped their lives apart. Feldman, one of Washington's top child abuse experts, considers himself an authority on Munchausen by proxy, a controversial mental illness that drives mothers to deliberately make their children sick or falsify symptoms in order to get attention for themselves. Fathers are almost never diagnosed with the disorder. Many experts believe the syndrome to be rare, but Feldman is convinced otherwise. During the last 25 years, he's been involved in more than 100 Munchausen cases, far more than any other doctor in the state. Because Feldman works for Children's Hospital and Medical Center in Seattle and consults for the state's Protective Services Agency, those allegations invariably trigger strong emergency responses, often resulting in the removal of young children, at least temporarily, from their home. It's that power that is now being publicly questioned. At least 5 families have sued Feldman over the past 6 years, claiming he was negligent or reckless in misdiagnosing Munchausen by proxy. In each case, CPS investigators found no evidence of Munchausen, poisoning, or any other abuse. Children were returned, cases closed, never were any criminal charges filed. But the consequences were severe. One family lost a child they were in the process of adopting. Others spent their life savings getting their kids back, undergoing intense psychiatric testing. It was like the Salem witch hunts, Brooker said. You were guilty until proven innocent. Once a mother is labeled a Munchausen by proxy suspect, the stigma is severe. The suspicions follow families, often state to state. They become pariahs in their communities. They fear taking sick children to the doctor. Some children are traumatized from forced separations. Feldman has so far escaped legal penalties or sanctions because he's required to report suspected abuse, and he's protected even if he's wrong. On the advice of his attorney, Feldman won't say whether he has ever been wrong or changed his mind regarding a Munchausen case. Quote, it's always a balancing act when you're dealing with the safety of a child versus the family's integrity and the family's well being, unquote. He said in a recent interview, quote, we do our best to narrow the level of uncertainty, end quote. But other experts who have reviewed the cases are convinced Feldman's conclusions distorted the evidence, unfairly implicating parents. It looks to me like there's a big epidemic of Munchausen surrounding Dr. Feldman, said Dr. Gil Kilman, a San Francisco psychiatrist who testified against Feldman in several of the lawsuits. Even if he were seeing 1 million patients a year, he couldn't diagnose that many, said Tom Ryan, an Arizona attorney who has handled dozens of cases in which mothers have been falsely accused of having Munchausen by proxy. While Feldman believes most pediatricians have undetected Munchausen by proxy patients in their caseloads, he's claimed in deposition to have seen an equal number of cases in which he's ruled out the syndrome. But there's no central place where documented cases are reported. It's impossible to tell how common Munchausen by proxy is. Estimates by expert range from 1 in 1 million to 2.5 in 100,000. Prosecutions of Munchausen cases are rare as well. King County authorities could only recall 1 or 2 criminal prosecutions in the past 20 years. The rate of Feldman's allegations so alarmed Kleeman that he filed a complaint with CBS, citing the error rate Dr. Feldman has in making this diagnosis and the frequency with which the children have other causes for their conditions. All of the children involved in cases that triggered lawsuits had been or were eventually diagnosed with verifiable diseases or disorders that explain their symptoms. One child, for example, was later diagnosed with cerebral palsy after her mother was first suspected of Munchausen. When the lawsuits came, Feldman claimed immunity under child protection reporting laws and won. The cases were dismissed before trial. As a physician, Feldman is a mandated reporter, which means he's legally required to report abuse if he has a reasonable cause to believe that a child is being harmed. He doesn't need proof, and if he makes a mistake, unlike a treating physician, he can't be held accountable for a wrong diagnosis and its aftermath. In the most recently appealed case, however, Washington Court of Appeals Judge Kenneth Cato wrote a stinging dissent. Dr. Feldman apparently has a penchant for diagnosing or misdiagnosing MSBP, notwithstanding its rarity and his questioned qualifications to make that diagnosis, Cato wrote in May. Whether the doctor acted in good faith cannot be determined as a matter of law in these circumstances. It is a question for the jury to decide, not the court. Lawyers for that family filed the appeal and are now asking the state Supreme Court to review the case. A decision is expected within a few weeks. The families who have dealt with the Munchausen allegations say they've suffered emotionally and financially. They want Feldman, CBS, and Children's Hospital to be held accountable. Doug and Melissa DeJong lost their daughter for 6 months in 1997 when she was still breastfeeding. They spent $17,000 maxing out their credit cards in the process to handle legal fees. The experience was so distressing they moved to Birch Bay, Washington to be away from the Seattle doctors. Their daughter was eventually diagnosed with cerebral palsy. We're still to this day paying for it, emotionally and financially, said Doug DeJong. They put the burden of proof on the parents to prove our innocence. Dina Royal can no longer find a local pediatrician willing to treat her 3 school-age children, 2 of whom have chronic medical problems, because of the stigma of suspected Munchausen. CPS closed its investigation of her family in April after preliminary tests showed many of one son's unusual symptoms may be the result of a rare genetic disorder. Even though the case was closed and unfounded, Feldman has refused to remove the red child abuse alert on her children's medical charts at Children's Hospital where her kids see specialists. Royal feels the alert is affecting their medical care by making specialists fearful to pursue tests as questions arise. It's like being branded with a big scarlet letter, she said. Kevin and Nancy Grennan traveled from Illinois to see a specialist at Children's in 1995 in hopes of curing their daughter's epilepsy. Previous treatments hadn't alleviated the seizures, which were affecting her ability to speak. Instead, Feldman reported the case to Illinois Child Protection Authorities and they lost their daughter for 3 months. They spent about $30,000 before the child abuse case was closed. Robert and Christy Ewell, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that one, were planning to raise a family on their ranch in Republic, Washington when Munchausen allegations derailed the dream. A baby they were in the process of adopting was taken away in 1996 after living with them for nearly a year. Although CBS closed the case, the Ewells had to sell their ranch to fund their legal battle to get the baby back, and they never did. In each case, the families got swept into the child protection system with no independent evaluation of whether Feldman had made the right call. Indeed, Feldman himself admits in court documents that as a pediatrician, he is not qualified to assess the mental health of the mother, which would require a psychiatric evaluation. Yet, when a parent suspected of Munchausen is reported to CBS, the agency calls on a list of medical specialists to evaluate the case. Because of his reputation, Feldman is the specialist most frequently called. CBS said the lawsuits haven't affected Feldman's standing as a consultant. You are innocent until proven guilty, said Bernie Friedman, a risk management official with the agency. Feldman reviews the child's medical history looking for inconsistency in elaborations or outright falsifications. He admits he doesn't always have access to all the child's medical records. He usually doesn't interview the mother because he says mothers, by definition, will misrepresent the situation. But he will sometimes try and interview another family member about her. Sometimes he also recommends covert video surveillance during hospitalizations to catch the mother in the act of harming her child. Now, I mean, a video surveillance, like if they could actually see something, that's one thing, but saying that he refuses to talk to the mothers because by definition they will misrepresent the situation, how is was this guy ever considered legit? And from what I could tell from a quick Google, y'all, he just retired a couple of years ago, was still doing this up till a couple of years ago, from what I can tell from a quick Google, which could be not totally accurate because people have the same names and stuff like that. But yeah. Okay, back to the article. If Feldman decides the mother likely has Munchausen by proxy, the agency mounts a full child abuse response, typically removing the child from the home pending a dependency hearing. In most cases, parents have to find and pay for their own second opinions to get their children back. Feldman is paid for his consultations with CBS through a consulting contract funded by the state and managed by the University of Washington. He is also one of the main medical advisors to the child protection team at Children's. Typically, the team meets to discuss the case before making a referral. Outsiders, such as the child's regular doctors, may be invited to that meeting. Feldman reports his findings to the team. He is viewed as someone with an awful lot of expertise, and because of his report, his expertise needs to be listened to carefully, said Dr. Richard Multeney, medical director at Children's. Angry accused parents and lawsuits come with the territory of child abuse consulting, Multeney said. So does the risk of being wrong. I know what it must feel like to be accused unjustly, Multini said. I also understand the consequence of not doing that. It's a lot harder to look a relative in the face and have to say I'm sorry when we didn't report suspected abuse, when we had the chance and now a child is dead. Critics say there aren't enough safeguards built into the system. The destructive force it unleashes on these families is tremendous, Ryan said. It's like being sucked into a black hole. The state can expend millions, and the poor family is absolutely overwhelmed. That was true for Michelle Bateman and her parents, the Brookers. As police meticulously searched their house, even rifling through their spice drawers, the stunned grandparents tried to piece together what was happening. Police eventually found what would become a key piece of evidence against their daughter: a small bottle of syrup of Epicac. Epicac is a commonly used first aid supply used to induce vomiting and accidental poisonings and found in most households with young children. The bottle, steel sealed and past its expiration date, was on the top shelf of the family's hall medicine cabinet. Bateman was 20 when her son Christopher was born. Unmarried, she and her baby lived with the Brookers so she could go to nursing school. But the baby was fussy and uncomfortable nearly from birth, said Ida Brooker, who recalls walking the inconsolable baby for hours before dawn. The family grew increasingly frustrated as doctors couldn't help them. Finally, they referred to Dr. Ross Kendall, a pediatric gastroenterologist at Mary Burge Children's Hospital and Health Center in Tacoma. Although he diagnosed Christopher with cyclic vomiting stemming from abdominal abdominal migraines and started him on medication, he admitted in depositions that he suspected Bateman of Munchausen from the start. Her hostility to people who suggested other diagnoses, persistent doctor visits, and Christopher's lack of response to treatment reinforced this belief. He said later in court documents, noting, "Mother fits the profile." Over the next 2 years, without telling the family, he began testing Christopher's urine for Epicac to see if Bateman was intentionally dosing him to make him vomit. After 3 times, a test came back positive. Kendall reported Bateman to state authorities, and CBS went to Feldman. Without seeing Christopher or talking to Bateman, and based on his own reading of certain records and discussions with Kendall, Feldman told CBS, "Christopher clearly fits the primary criteria for Munchausen syndrome by proxy." He based part of his assessment on her repeated trips to the emergency room to treat Christopher's vomiting. Yet Kendall's orders were that she was to take him to the ER after each episode for IV infusions of an experimental drug called Kitril. The Epicac test also figured prominently in Feldman's analysis, even though toxicologists say it cannot distinguish Epicac from pseudoephedrine, a common cold medicine ingredient Christopher was taking on Kendall's advice. Based on Feldman's recommendation, the state removed Christopher from his home. Bateman was devastated. So was Chris Brooker, who recalls breaking down in front of the porch that day. "I just sat there and cried for 2 hours," he said. To mount a legal defense, Ida cashed in her Boeing retirement fund. He sold stock and other assets, including a cherished collection of rare military helmet plates. They petitioned the court to become Christopher's legal guardians and won, but only on the condition that Bateman move out and her visits be restricted to 2 hours a week. For the next 2.5 years, she was supervised and tested by CBS until authorities were finally satisfied that she didn't have Munchausen and closed the case in 1999. Christopher, now 10, is still in counseling to deal with this experience. According to the family, Kendall contacted them years later through their attorney and apologized for the inconvenience he had caused them. "I lost my child, my home, my job, my parents. My son lost his mother, his home, and his security," Bateman said. "That's an inconvenience?" Kendall could not be reached for comment. Feldman, who declined to discuss specific cases, has never contacted the family. Bateman's case illustrates the dangers of profiling parents, expert says. Parents of very sick children, young or anxious parents, or those who advocate aggressively for their children all fit the profile of people suffering from Munchausen by proxy. Those who seek multiple opinions, who have worked in the medical field, or who go to the doctor frequently also fit, as do those children who have multiple illnesses that don't match known syndromes. Some specialists point out that many of their patients' mothers have been accused of Munchausen before their children were eventually diagnosed with unusual disorders. A parent who is calm in the face of serious difficulties, or one who gets extremely angry and demanding, Both fit the profile. Also fitting the profile are parents of sick children who frequently acquire detailed knowledge about the diseases, leading them to appear obsessed with their children's disorders. And in a particularly, I don't know how to pronounce that word, y'all, I'm sorry. In a particularly odd twist, denial that you have Munchausen is a sign that you have it. Oh my God, y'all, what is happening? There are individuals who, and now look, we've got a quote from the other Dr. Feldman. It's so weird that we have a Dr. Kenneth Feldman and a Dr. Marc Feldman who are both experts in Munchausen. Okay, this quote is from Dr. Marc Feldman. There are individuals who see Munchausen by proxy around every corner, said Dr. Marc Feldman, no relation, an Alabama psychiatrist who has testified on both sides of these cases. Quote from Dr. Feldman again. Some people became intrigued with the novelty and drama of it and have sought to establish themselves rapidly as experts in the field. One way to do that is to say you've seen a lot of cases, but that doesn't mean all those reported cases were truly Munchausen. It can lead to pinhole vision where only those features that matched Munchausen by proxy were commented on and all information contrary to the diagnosis was disregarded. Being sued 5 times for alleged misdiagnoses, he said, should raise red flags. Oh, yeah, you think? That's pretty high, he said. If I'd been sued 5 times for anything, I would probably ask for supervision for my work before I proceeded. Maltini of Children's Hospital stands behind Kenneth Feldman's work, saying that despite the lawsuits and complaint, there's no need for any additional review or auditing of the Munchausen diagnoses. But in recent years, a half dozen families have complained about Feldman to the state licensing board, alleging unprofessional conduct related to misdiagnosing the disorder. In 5 of those cases, the Washington State Medical Quality Commission closed the complaints after reviewing Feldman's explanations for his actions, asking for no further review. One case is still under investigation. None of this phases Feldman, who lectures around the region on the threat of Munchausen by proxy. Bespectacled and soft spoken, Feldman, 58, betrays little of the passion that has given him a reputation as a tireless advocate for children's welfare. He doesn't flinch at criticism, but admits to being wearied of the relentless legal challenges. Quote, it's stressful to be involved in any way, let's just leave it at that, but someone has to do it. End quote. Feldman, who went to medical school in his home state of Wisconsin, came to Seattle in 1970 as an intern in pediatrics at Children's. Over the years, the father of 2 increasingly focused on childhood injury prevention. He claims to have seen his first case of Munchausen by proxy in the 70s before the phrase was even coined. Today, he divides his time between his work in general pediatrics at Children's, research and child abuse consulting, and work with low income families. He operates out of a cramped windowless office at Children's lined with case files. The Munchausen database he keeps is one of the only ones like it in the country. He is a pioneer in Munchausen, said his former teacher, Dr. Abe Bergman, a pediatrician at Harborview Medical Center and head of Child Abuse Medical Consulting Network run by the University of Washington, through which Feldman consults. His research on the effect of the water heater settings on scalding injuries has been credited with reducing the national incidence of tap water burns. In the mid 80s, he fought to get legislation passed that reduced settings on water heaters. Admirers say Feldman is a brilliant diagnostician. He knows every rare disease, said Bergman. His mind is like a computer. Feldman said he deals aggressively with suspected Munchausen cases because children are in grave danger. Around 1,200 kids will sustain new events of suffocation and poisoning in the United States this year, he said, and that's probably an underestimate. Children should not be reunited with mothers who've been diagnosed with Munchausen, he said, and he faults the courts for returning them. It's hard for the court systems to get a handle on this, he said. Juries tend to believe a parent wouldn't do it. Judges tend to believe they wouldn't do it. Children are usually returned, but that doesn't obviate the diagnosis. It's like he gives no leeway to the possibility whatsoever that he might get it wrong. It's like dude thinks he's an infallible computer, and even computers aren't infallible. There are errors in the code sometimes. Things glitch. Like, what? Given the murky nature of most Munchausen cases, some experts are calling for more oversight before a child is removed from his parent. One solution is to get rid of the label altogether. If a parent is suspected of harming a child, investigate it as a criminal assault case, not a vague psychiatric condition, some experts say. Now, I agree with that. It's been irritating to me for a long time that this gets treated like a disease. I don't give a fuck about what is behind the mind of an abuser, a murderer, or anything like that. I don't care how their mind works. I don't want to know their secrets. I just want them to be called out and held accountable for their crimes. If someone abuses children, I don't give a shit if it's Munchausen by proxy or just straight up old fashioned child abuse. Throw them under the jail. Under the jail. I don't care. If someone murders, in most instances, unless the murder happened as they were actively trying to get away, and I don't believe that was the case in Gypsy Rose Blanchard. She could have walked out anytime. She proved that by admitting she was leaving the house to go meet older men and then come back. I don't care that she was of legal adult age when she was doing that. That tells us from her mouth that she had the ability to leave. She could have just stayed gone, taken that cash that she was already stealing from Dee Dee and kept on going, started actually living a real life. But but yeah, I went on that whole little rant there to say I completely agree that the diagnosis is, in my opinion, pointless and not necessary other than of some niche psychiatric point of interest study. If people are interested in that kind of thing, that's perfectly fine. But whenever it comes to justice, I don't care. What do y'all think? Am I just being over triggered here because I've just read about a whole bunch of families getting unjustly accused and the children being actually abused by the trauma being removed due to the unjust accusation? Like, am I just overranting here? Basically, am I right or am I reaching, friends? Let me know in the comments. Okay, back to what the article actually says. Others say the state should not let a pediatrician alone make what is essentially a mental health assessment. And before a child is removed from a home, the family should have the opportunity to get an independent assessment. Experts also recommend that all records be scrutinized in determining whether a mother has lied or mischaracterized her child's medical history, not just some of them. Munchausen by proxy should be diagnosed based on objective signs and symptoms and not based on one's impression of the parent, says Marc Feldman, the psychiatrist. I agree with him on that. At the same time, though, whenever it comes to things like, changing up the name and stuff like that, I grew up in the Ozarks in the mountains where everybody's got a nickname. People, even in close families, mix up spelling. I'm not saying a mother would do it, but like, I don't know, like the stuff that they're putting out here as, concrete evidence and the records sometimes can still be innocent. The families that have sued Kenneth Feldman argue that there needs to be some way to hold him accountable. I understand the need to protect our children, but the way the system is set up, there are severe penalties if you don't report, but nothing on the other side, said Doug DeJong, who nearly lost his daughter to a Munchausen allegation. If you falsely accuse or make a mistake, there is no penalty. There's no incentive to be careful. Wow. I wonder if that's changed any because, like I said, this article is from August 6, 2002. And I'm going to do a follow up to this video by looking into these cases that are specifically mentioned here and seeing if I can find what happened later. But like I said, y'all, from a quick Google, it seems like Feldman got off scot free and continued doing what he does until about 2023. What do y'all think, friends? Something I'm going to look up for part two as well is when did it change? And has it actually officially changed in like the, diagnostic manual that's used? Have they removed female as a criteria for profiling a suspect of Munchausen by proxy? Because that is just wild to me because when you Google it, you do get acknowledgement that there are some perpetrators who are not mothers or female, but that it's very rare. And then the AI notes that it is harder for fathers to be diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy because they don't fit the known criteria of female. That part kinda blew me away too because I guess I just had it in my brain, and I'm like I tell you, I'm a lover of history. I'm an amateur student of history. I love reading it, but there's still more that I don't know all the time. And I really thought that the notion of any type of mental illness having a diagnostic criteria of applies to females was done away in the early 1900s when they stopped putting women in asylum for hysteria. I mean, you know, even to this day, you get Gypsy and her stands saying things like, "Oh, well, obviously Dee Dee went and researched what symptoms to make up to play up that chromosome deletion and make sure that she showed every symptom possible." When the actual evidence, when we look at all the videos and documentation and Facebook posts and a social media website and the media appearances that Dee Dee made back then, it all shows that they slowed down after the diagnosis. They slowed way down. She still needed the to keep the grift going. She still needed to con and do the money. And, two things can be true. Like Dee Dee can be guilty of having been a thief and a con artist, and she can have mental health issues and diagnoses, and still one of them not be Munchausen by proxy. That I'm not actually qualified to decide that, regardless of my opinion. So I try to put that disclaimer out there, even though I don't see it, y'all. I do think that, there were elements to Dee Dee's way of treating Gypsy that were abusive as far as mentally and emotionally. But that is so common. That is so common. And it's not an excuse for murder. It's just not. So, what do y'all think about this? And yeah, I'm going to look into how many other cases of parents being falsely accused of Munchausen by proxy there have been in the last 10 or 20 years. Because holy hell, that article was eye opening. I had no idea. I'm going to go film a little palate cleanser, and I hope all of y'all are having a good day, friends. Tonight at midnight, there's going to be a new video going up on the Millennial at Midnight channel. Have a good day. See the new flower coming up. The big one there is the one that's already closed up. The little one is the new bud forming. Oh, Coolio and Biggie are anxious. Here you go, buddies. The other one's over here. Dude, you're gonna miss out on the food if you don't get to the right place. I'm gonna give them some over here, or at least scare them to the correct area. Yeah, there you go, bud. You're going the wrong way. There, food over here. No, what's the word I'm looking for? Bleh, bloopers.